Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladarga Velazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly.
Over the past 24 hours, northern Israel was targeted by some 100 rockets fired by Hezbollah from Lebanon. Israel responded with multiple strikes in Lebanon and Syria. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
About 100 rockets targeted several different areas of northern Israel in 3 separate waves as Hezbollah responded to alleged Israeli strikes that killed 5 people in Syria. The first salvo targeted the border city of Kiryat Shmona and a number of surrounding areas. At least 40 rockets were fired toward the city in the attacks. Several of the rockets were shot down by the Iron Dome, but some struck the northern city, causing damage to buildings. There were no reports of injuries. Later waves of Hezbollah rocket fire targeted Kibbutz Sar and Gesher Haziv. Some of the projectiles were shot down and others fell in open areas. Here, too, there were damages, but no injuries reported. In the third barrage, Hezbollah fired some 15 projectiles at the Nahariya area on the Israeli coast. The rockets were intercepted or impacted in open areas, and there were no reports of injuries or damage. In retaliation, the Air Force struck a launcher in the Blot area in South Lebanon, from which the projectiles were identified as being launched at Kiryat Shmona. Later, the Air Force targeted buildings used by Hezbollah in the villages of Kafar Kila and At Yashab, and hit a terror cell in the Areen area. 5 people were reported killed in Israeli strikes in Syria.
We begin today's broadcast with the news of yet another terror attack in Israel. A suspected car ramming attack took place at the Nir Tzvi intersection close to the city of Ramla when a driver crashed into a group of pedestrians at a bus stop, injuring 4, 2 seriously and 1 moderately. The attack was thwarted, according to security forces.
Israel is coming under attack on all fronts, in Gaza, in the north, and within Judea and Samaria. In Gaza, the IDF has been operating in the south and central areas. On the northern border, heavy cross-border exchanges with Hezbollah, and in Samaria, pursuing a terrorist gunman who wounded 3 Israelis. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has the report.
Day 284 of the war in Gaza. The forces of Division 162 continue fighting in the Rafah area. Over the past 24 hours, IDF ground forces eliminated a number of terrorists in coordination with the Air Force. They also located and destroyed a number of tunnel shafts in the area and destroyed additional terrorist infrastructure that posed a threat to IDF forces. The Alexandroni Brigade is operating in the center of the Gaza Strip. They carried out raids against 40 terrorist targets in the area using fighter jets and aircraft. Among the targets that were attacked were sniper and observation posts, military buildings, and terrorist infrastructure. Turning north, Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets from Lebanon toward Kiryat Shmona and the surrounding area. Most of the rockets were intercepted and no injuries were reported. The barrage follows an attack by an Israeli aircraft on a car in Syrian territory near the Lebanese border. That attack eliminated a Hezbollah commander and also businessman Mohammed Bara al-Qatarji, close to the Assad regime. The businessman served as a money changer who helped finance Hezbollah and other organizations in the region. The cross-border attacks are ongoing. The Air Force struck a military storage facility in the Jabal region alongside a Hezbollah military structure in Kafar Kila in South Lebanon. And in Samaria, 3 Israelis were lightly wounded today when terrorists opened fire on a vehicle. The injured were an adult and 2 teens hurt by shattered glass. They were transferred to hospital for treatment. Over 50 bullets were reportedly fired. The gunman fled the scene after the shooting with the IDF in pursuit. The shooting took place at the Ramim intersection in northern Samaria near Beit Lid and the Jewish community of Shavei Shomron. After the shooting, the head of the Samaria Council, Yossi Dagan, said, "There is a war in Judea and Samaria, just like there is a war in Gaza and on the northern border."
Well, Israel awoke to the shocking story of a mother in Herzliya suspected of brutally murdering her 6-year-old son. Police arrested the suspect after she attacked a security guard near a mall, carrying an axe and dripping in blood. The guard disarmed the woman before calling in backup. The body of her son was discovered in the suspect's home in Herzliya after the suspect's arrest. Mediation efforts to reach a hostage for ceasefire agreement are still underway and have not been derailed by the Israeli targeting of Hamas military chief Mohammed Dif. That's the word from Hamas officials as Israeli Mossad chief David Barnea heads back to Doha, Qatar. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reports.
Despite reports to the contrary, the Hamas terror group has not withdrawn from ceasefire talks over this weekend's Israeli attack targeting Mohammed Dif. The statement from the group denied Hamas had left or suspended the talks as a result of the Israeli strike. The announcement did blame Prime Minister Netanyahu with attempting to sabotage a potential agreement. The announcement came hours after an unnamed Hamas official was reported saying that the Palestinian terror group has withdrawn from the talks because of what it called Israeli massacres and Israelis' attitude in negotiations. Prime Minister Netanyahu has reportedly hardened the Israeli negotiating stance in light of reported intelligence showing Hamas needs a ceasefire agreement due to its weakening military position. Ramped-up hostage talks in Doha and Cairo took place throughout much of last week, and contacts are ongoing. Further negotiations are still planned for this week in Doha with the participation of Mossad chief David Barnea. The current round of talks are based on an Israeli proposal. The talks stalled in June, but a recent reworking of the agreement's language opened the door for renewed negotiations. This after Hamas dropped its demand that the framework include commitment from Israel to end the war during the first phase. The terror group is still demanding a commitment to that effect from mediators. It's believed that 116 hostages abducted by Hamas on October 7th remain in Gaza, including the remains of 42 whose deaths the IDF has confirmed.
Stunning news from the United States, where yesterday former President Trump was shot at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The former president was largely unharmed, but the entire nation is in shock from the political violence. Let's take a look at what happened yesterday. Americans are in shock after former U.S. President Trump was targeted in an assassination attempt at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday afternoon. While Trump survived, one attendee of the rally was killed and 2 others were injured. The shooter was also neutralized by security forces. In the footage, which was broadcast live, there's a barrage of gunfire before the former president is seen dropping to the ground with a bloody ear. Secret Service immediately jumped in to usher him off stage. Trump was seen pumping his fist to the crowd while being covered by the Secret Service en route to his vehicle. The Secret Service stated that the incident is an ongoing investigation, and former President Trump publicly thanked them and all law enforcement on social media for their professional and rapid response to the attack. Trump confirmed he was targeted and the bullet missed him by several inches, piercing the upper part of his ear. On Sunday morning, the FBI named Thomas Matthew Crooks of Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, as the suspect, and sources involved in the investigation stated that an AR-style rifle was recovered from the scene where the shooter fired at the rally from an elevated position 150 yards away. Political leaders from left to right have condemned the violence, the likes of which have not been seen in America since the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. President Biden harshly condemned the attack, stating there's no place in America for this type of violence. In Israel, Foreign Minister Katz, as well as Prime Minister Netanyahu, have spoken out against political violence and the shocking assassination attempt. The investigation is ongoing, and more information is expected to be released in the coming days. Well, as the investigation into this attempted assassination of former President Trump intensifies, here to speak with us about the incident and its ramifications is former MK and former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Just to start, what is your take on this attempted assassination of Trump, and what are the ramifications in terms of political violence?
Good to be with you, especially, even on this very hard day. I've been working in Washington back and forth, working to deepen awareness about the situation in the northern part of the country. And one of the takeaways you come away from Washington is that you come back to a country, Israel, that is at war, but you feel like you've come from a country which is also at war, a different type of war. The level of political discourse, of violence in that discourse has been shocking. So the attempted assassination attempt was shocking, but it wasn't surprising. And one cannot spend some time in the United States without feeling the deep and bitter polarization between the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, and the fact that this election, probably more than any other election in American history, certainly with modern memory, is perceived by both sides as an existential election. That if the people voting for Trump feel that he doesn't win, that that's the end of America, and the people will be voting for President Biden or any other Democrat candidate feels that if the Democrats don't win, it's the end of America, certainly the end of American democracy. So the stakes are just super high here. And the level of discourse, again, is extremely violent. It's sort of hardwired into that discourse. So again, it was shocking, but not surprising. And I feel that we're just at the beginning of this episode, not even the middle, certainly not the end, and that already there are conspiracy theories flying around about how was it that a shooter was able to position himself on a building with a clear line of sight to the former president. How is it that people noticed the shooter, were trying to warn about this shooter, but the Secret Service didn't respond? That's going to cause a tremendous amount of instability or further instability in the American political system. These type of accusations will be floating around. I think the immediate takeaway would be, I think that President Trump having that presence of mind to give that sort of fist up salute and showing that he was still able to rally his crowd is going to redound to his benefit in the polls. He's already ahead in the polls, and I think that this, in terms, unless the Democrats can turn this around in a very radical way, President Trump will continue to expand his lead over the Democratic candidates. This, by the way, is not good for the state of Israel in any way. Looking back at history, say 1973, when President Nixon was in the throes of the Watergate scandal, basically locked in a room in Florida. The Soviets took note of that. The Egyptians and the Syrians took note of that, and one of the results was the Yom Kippur War attack of October 6th. The world is watching to see whether there's strength in Washington, whether there's clear leadership in Washington, whether there's deep-seated political instability in the United States, and none of that would redound to Israel's benefit. Israel has a paramount strategic interest in having a strong and united America, and certainly a safe American president.
Absolutely. Can you speak just a little bit about the impact of political assassinations, particularly with Israel? How do such historical events impact the policymaking?
Well, many years ago, I was an advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and his government when he was assassinated. And I know the long-term, profound ramifications that assassination had for this country. We were unaccustomed to political assassinations. Unfortunately, they are more common in the United States. We all remember, I'm old enough to remember President Kennedy's assassination, and people of my generation know exactly where they were when they heard about that. Indelibly marked in our memory. But then the assassination of his brother, Bobby Kennedy, in 1968, who was a leading candidate for the Democratic Party, assassinated by a Palestinian, Sirhan Sirhan, who is still alive today and still in prison. And his son, Robert Kennedy, is now a candidate for the presidency. He's the independent candidate. And by the way, I know him fairly well, and I know him to be a very pro-Israel figure. I don't know if it's because of Sirhan Sirhan, but he's very pro-Israel. So these are all connections that we have to this incident. And all we can say right now, as Israelis, first of all, to wish a rapid and complete recovery to former President Trump. We also wish a rapid and complete recovery to the people of the United States and to the American government generally, because that is not just a moral interest for the state of Israel, it's a strategic security interest for the state of Israel.
Now, do you see any similarities between the style of rhetoric against former President Trump and the style of rhetoric we're seeing in Israel? How does a society truly prevent such heinous acts of political violence?
I think that's a very good point, because I remember the period before the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And there, too, I would come out of the Prime Minister's office and my car would be pelted with eggs and rotten vegetables. And I come home and I say, listen, someone's going to get assassinated here. I never thought it was going to be Yitzhak Rabin. I thought he was above the fray, but it wasn't true. So you can actually, that atmosphere is almost palatable. It really is. And that was the feeling I had in Washington this time, too. It was very familiar to me and frightening, frankly. And I think this is a time when society should take advantage of the fact that the president was not seriously hurt, certainly not killed, to take a deep breath and say, let's pull back from the abyss. We can have a substantive political debate. We can even sometimes have a bitter political debate, but a bitter debate where the other side is vilified and demonized and perceived as an existential threat. that is where violence occurs. And we have to take a step back from that precipice.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much for joining us, former MK and former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren.
Thank you, and have a good and quiet, safe day.
And only 2 days after an assassin's bullet grazed his right ear, former U.S. President Donald Trump received a hero's welcome at the Republican National Convention underway in Milwaukee. Trump shared the spotlight by announcing that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will be his running mate. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the report.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump made a triumphant appearance during the first night of the Republican National Convention, receiving an ovation from the party faithful just 2 days after a would-be assassin's bullet grazed his right ear.
Energized, energized. I'm up for it, baby. Too bad it's not November 5th now.
I love it. I love it. It stands for his greatness, his legacy. It just keeps growing and keep growing and keep growing. It is unbelievable, historic time. We are a part of this history. We love President Trump. Let's go, baby.
The big news on the opening night of the convention was Trump's announcement of the selection of Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate for vice president. James David Vance is a freshman U.S. Senator from Ohio who has made support for Israel an exception to his America First vision of foreign policy. The selection of the 39-year-old Vance represents a full embrace of the growing isolationist wing of the Republican Party, which has pushed back against U.S. military aid for Ukraine while maintaining support for security assistance to Israel. Vance explained his worldview in May, saying, "I'm supportive of Israel and the war against Hamas. I certainly admire the Ukrainians who are fighting against Russia, but I do not think that it is in America's interest to continue to fund an effectively never-ending war in Ukraine." Trump is set to formally accept the party's nomination on Thursday and will face Democratic President Joe Biden in the November election, unless Biden is replaced as the candidate at the Democratic National Convention next month.
As the Secret Service and FBI continue to investigate the attempted assassination of former President Trump, speculation continues to grow about how this could have happened in the first place, especially given the fact that there was already enhanced security for President Trump. Here to speak with us about just that is Brad Orsini of the Secure Communities Network. Brad, thanks so much for joining us on the broadcast today. I just wanted to start by asking about actually the Iran issue. The FBI has been very clear that there's no known connection between crooks and the Islamic Republic. But as a result of this threat, Trump reportedly had enhanced security detail already. So how on earth did a 20-year-old slip past them?
Well, I can't answer specifically what happened in this particular investigation. I can tell you what is typically done in an active shooter investigation. There would have been a large threat assessment done through the Secret Service. They would have put security resources out there in any event. What I can talk about is what is going on now with the FBI, who is the lead in the investigation, and now what they are trying to uncover. Are there any other conspirators out there? And just as importantly, what is the motive? Now that that threat was neutralized that day, there's going to be an immersive investigation into the shooter's violent ideation and what led him to this attack. And at this point, the FBI will be looking at this investigation in two major phases. One, recreating that crime scene with our evidence response team, computer analysis response team, and all the resources necessary to recreate that actual event. That will feed into the investigation. There will be investigators on the ground interviewing as many people as possible to identify what that violent ideation came from, where it came from, what led this shooter to this particular act, and we will be recreating that. There is somebody out there with information that knows something about any one of these active shooters. That is just statistically accurate, and so that is what they are going to be focusing on right now.
Now, when it comes to Thomas Matthew Crooks, the entire situation is a little bit strange. I mean, normally 20-year-olds have a long track record of social media activity, and then we find out he didn't really use social media. Really, very little has been released about him or the incident in general. What do we know so far that's public about this suspect, and what is the FBI doing? A little bit of what you talked about in terms of this current stage of the investigation.
Well, at this point, I don't have any knowledge of what's going on in this particular active investigation. What I can tell you, what I can assure you that the FBI is doing is everything possible to uncover that motive, to go through every inch of social media, to look through his cell phone, get it to that computer analysis response team, any kind of computer, cell phone, anything he may have had access to, anything his friends, relatives has access to. Now this investigation is going to span out. A lot of times in active shooters, we know that motive right away. Unfortunately, there are instances where people hide those motives for whatever reason, and now it's going to be an investigation. We encourage people to remain calm, remain vigilant, and provide that information to law enforcement, especially the FBI now. There are going to be people that were at that rally that took videos. Every one of the videos that has been taken, they're going to want to get that evidence. They're going to want to just recreate everything. Anybody that knew this individual, they're going to want to talk to and really build a snapshot into the life of the individual. Build out those anomalies on what happened and what led to that shooting.
Now, we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran has wanted to take out both former President Trump and the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, for some time over the assassination of Soleimani. I'm wondering if you can speak to the FBI's protocol when it comes to dealing with high-profile threats from entire nations, like in the case of Iran.
I think the FBI deals with the threats the way they deal with them internally, externally. They're going to collect that information. They're going to analyze that information to develop whether it's a true threat to the individual. They're going to work with the individual. They're going to work with community members, stakeholders to identify what a true threat is, whether it's international or domestic. They're looking at threats every single day to high-profile individuals. This is nothing new that anybody that is in the political world that gets threatened. This is not new in the country. It's not new in anywhere in the world. So we have to be hyper vigilant right now and make sure that if we hear information that somebody is going to hurt somebody else, look to shoot, look to assassinate, whatever that is, we need to make sure we collect that information and get it in the hands of law enforcement.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for your time, Brad Orsini. We are unfortunately out of time, but thank you for joining us and sharing some insight on the style and what they're focused on in this investigation.
Thank you very much.
And the European Union has announced sanctions against far-right Israelis and a group trying to block aid to Gaza. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
The EU has announced a new round of sanctions against far-right activists and an Israeli organization trying to block humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza. Targeted was Tzav Tesha, an activist group that opposes the delivery of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip amid the war with Hamas and attempts to sabotage it, sometimes violently. The bloc sanctioned far-right activists Benzi Gopstein and Baruch Marzel, as well as settler activists Moshe Sharvit, Tzvi Bar Yosef, and Issachar Man. Sharvit and Bar Yosef's illegal outposts, known as Moshe's Farm and Tzvi's Farm, were also sanctioned. All of the individuals, apart from Marzel, have already been sanctioned by the United States. As a result of the EU sanctions, the people listed will be subject to an asset freeze and a travel ban to the EU. Both direct and indirect funding of any of their entities are prohibited.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.